to the first day of the orientation week here at the National Law School. I'm Rag Yadava. I'm an assistant professor here at NLS. And we here with us the Vice Chancellor of the university, Professor Krishnaswamy, whom all of you would have heard speak earlier today, and a number of different faculty members whom you'll meet, many of whom you'll meet through the course of this orientation week. I'd also like to just extend a particularly warm welcome to all our incoming students from the undergraduate and postgraduate cohorts. Like Justice Bhatt said, we're meeting under very odd circumstances during this pandemic in an online format. But we're looking forward to meeting all of you soon on campus in person. So uh, I hope that our engagement online is on its last limbs. Um, so it's my privilege to introduce our commencement speaker today, Justice Ravindra Bhatt of the Supreme Court. We all know Justice Bhatt, but I think a short introduction is in order. So Justice Bhatt was elevated to the Supreme Court in 2019 after having served as a judge of the Delhi High Court and a Chief Justice of the Rajasthan High Court for almost 15 years, and after a distinguished career as a practicing advocate at the Supreme Court. In his time as a judge, Justice Bhatt has authored several landmark judgments, which many of you would have heard of as you prepared for CLAT, and many of them were in the news as well, ranging from difficult issues of patent rights and public access to medicines in the famous Cipla versus Roche case, transparency in the higher judiciary under the Right to Information Act when concerns over accountability have been raging in the public debate, the constitutionality of the Competition Commission of India in a rapidly privatizing market economy, and most recently, the very vexed question of affirmative action and reservations in the Maratha case. Um, I should also mention that as a lawyer, Justice Bhatt argued in the famous TMA Pi case, which set the standard for educational philosophy across the country, not just as a business or a vocation or a private enterprise, but as a public good meant to serve the interests of the country through its students and its public through a culture of free inquiry and of research, something which I think ties in very closely with NLS's mission and something which I hope all of you experience in your 5 years here at law school. Um, but I think, and I may venture to say that Justice Bhatt would agree with me on this, that a judge is more than just a list of his or her landmark judgments. It's perhaps the daily administration of justice and the adjudication of claims that are presented by litigants on a daily basis, litigants high and low, that the work of a judge is really to be seen and to be measured. And that being so, having been a regular observer of Justice Bhatt's court, what stands out to me, and I think deserves particular mention here, is the mix of intellectual rigor and of humanism, of approaching the law with a sense of empathy and compassion, along with, I must mention, a very healthy dose of humor. And I think that has been the experience of most advocates who have entered his court. And I hope that our classrooms can match up to that standard. Um, Having studied English literature in his early days at Delhi University, and he's maintained a very rigorous and vigorous reading habit since, I think uh, Justice Bhatt has perhaps tempered the hard rigor of the law with the color and the texture of literature, which again is what I think the interdisciplinary approach at the law school aspires to do. Um, I must also say, if I may be allowed the liberty of a small personal digression, that Justice Bhatt has been and is known to be especially welcoming of young lawyers, both in his chamber and in his court, egging them on to argue independently and to find their own feet and their swadharma, their own philosophy, not just of the law, but of life as well, especially in those early years of young professional life where when the rubber meets the road. And as students who are just entering the world of the arts and the law at the threshold of a university experience, I think that perhaps it's on this count that we have a lot to learn from Justice Bhatt's experience. And I hope that this commencement address today pushes us to think, faculty and students alike, to reflect on what a legal and liberal arts education can and should mean in India today. Um, so with those short comments, thank you, Justice Bhatt, for accepting our invitation to speak with us today. It's an honor to have you. And we'll have a 20-minute question and answer session after Justice Bhatt's address. So I can request everyone to put in their questions in the chat box, as in when you think of them, and I'll try taking as many of them up as I can after the address. We're going to end today's session uh, dot at 7 o'clock. So I may not be able to take up all questions, but I'll try and do my best. Um, I'll now turn the screen over to Sudhir for his opening remarks, and then we'll hear from Justice Bhatt.
Thanks, Rag. Thanks, Rag. You stole many of my lines, so I will do an informal and quite different introduction to Justice Bhatt. I said earlier this morning to all of you at the start of the orientation program that it's a privilege to be at NLS, and let me repeat that it's a privilege to have Justice Bhatt speak on your first day of your legal education. I want to just reflect on one aspect of his work, which is just his ecumenical intellectual interests. As someone with a graduate degree in English and a postgraduate degree in law, Justice Bhatt takes a very keen interest in the sciences, and his work on patents and IP shows a depth and a rigor that all of us would envy and aspire to. And Rag mentioned that it's not a linear interest only in science and the law. It's a wide-ranging interest. And for all those reasons that I spoke about this morning, if an NLS education is successful, it would give you that same ecumenical spirit. So let me invite Justice Bhatt in that spirit to take it away and speak to our incoming cohort for 21-22. Over to you, sir.
Thank you, Dr. Krishnaswamy. Good evening, my young friends, the fresh entrants to NLSIU, all the existing faculty, other students of NLSIU, and I take it that some parents are also likely to be here. So good evening to all of you. I'm delighted to be part of this, to be the first speaker in this series of what you characterize as, what we would characterize as an orientation, but what NLSIU says as a commencement event. I'll begin by saying I don't know what motivated each one of you who have joined NLSIU to choose the law. But from a lifetime experience of law as a lawyer, then as a judge, I can promise you this, that it captivates and grabs you to a lifetime journey, lifelong journey in which you will be taught to uphold the values of intellectual integrity, civility, mutual respect, and public service. Having said that, I'll do something very unusual. I will quote from a graduation speech given by Chief Justice Roberts of the US Supreme Court, himself a great lawyer before he became the Chief Justice 15 years ago. And this is what he said: I wish you bad luck from time to time so that you will be conscious of the role of chance in life and understand that your success is not completely deserved and the failure of others is not completely deserved. He went on to say, and when you lose, as you will from time to time, I hope I hope every now and then your opponent will gloat over your failure as a way to understand the importance of sportsmanship. I hope you will be ignored so you understand the importance of listening to others. And I hope you will have just enough pain to learn compassion. Justice Roberts told the students that while the road ahead would not be easy, it would be full of moments to learn from. Whether I wish these things or not, he said, they're going to happen. And he went on to conclude, and whether you benefit from them or not will depend on the ability to see the message in your misfortunes. Well, it's quite a different way to look at life, but certainly one that can be useful. To learn from one's mistake is one thing which each normal person will do. You should also learn from the mistakes of others. You will often see that lawyers do well in courts. It is good to borrow their good practice. Equally, it is good to learn what not to do from those who do something badly and suffer from this. This is education at first hand, and no one will teach you but yourself. So you have to be alert, alive to what is happening around you. Most of you have spent your lives so far in schools and colleges, schools essentially, where you were bound to stay at home. Being in campus now, and I take it that the campus life will be open after some time, hopefully when things become normal. It's a lifetime experience to live life on your terms. University life is when students get to experience several lifetime experiences, whether it is a learning to do their own things or understanding their abilities and inabilities. A university life enables individuals to learn to get through all kinds of good and bad situations. It is a kind of founding stone which will help the learners to survive in the long term. One of the most important things you will learn is social interaction. A university campus, university experience accounts for being a hub covering a diverse student community motivated towards their respective goals. In your case, a common goal of completing a degree in law. Interacting with peers and teachers alike provides learning and networking opportunities that cannot be easily attained in an online setup. You will all, hopefully, someday not far in the future, you will all eat and live together. The environment would be immersive. Since most of you will be living on your own, the values of sharing, of tolerance, spirit of accommodation, and as Justice Roberts said, of sportsmanship will be instilled in you. Experientially. A university is where you students build your first adult networks. You meet friends and mentors who become future contacts and colleagues and get the chance to mix with inspiring academic staffs who are leading experts in the field. Moreover, you get opportunities to interact and form relationships with other students or faculty members who visit the university for a different purpose. The next thing I would emphasize is realizing your passion. This is the time when you will get abundant time to concentrate on your interests and passion, following it by taking it to another level. After regular classes and activities, you will get some time on the campus which you can use in skilling yourself in the field which you have always dreamt of. Post-university life, people often lose themselves amidst the race of life, responsibilities, career pressures, and situations attached to adulthood. So this is the time when you develop those other skills which will come in very handy. Above all, you will be independent. This is the halfway house between full adulthood when you are unleashed into the world and into the deep end and the sheltered environment that you have been in. There's no better way to learn how to be independent than by being thrown into the deep end amongst others in the same position. Plus, you can learn from each other and realize how great it is to be in control of your own life. You can learn to handle yourself in the worst situation along with facing no obligation while deciding on going for a short vacation or attend a particular event. Coming to my journey, which I was told by Mr. Yadav that I should share with you, which I'm usually hesitant in talking about. My university journey in the university was not terribly eventful. I struggled most of my childhood with ill health caused due to asthma, and being an introvert who had to shift no less than 4 schools in 3 cities, I did not make too many lasting friendships. Yet our constantly moving family inculcated the ability to take change as a part of life. This has proved to be of a great value because I became sensitive to differences in habits, in language, maybe cuisine, and in ways of thinking. Also, it exposed me to different cultures in the South, in North, and I saw students from different social backgrounds. They are invaluable life lessons. Eventually, when I joined college, I went for honors in literature, as Dr. Krishnaswamy said, which was one of my passions, in which I graduated from Hindu College in Delhi University. When I joined, I made an easy choice. The toss was between literature and history. But in literature, the breadth of coverage opened my eyes to the expanse of humanities, which you now call as liberal arts. Literature is the gateway, it introduces the student to various other disciplines, notably philosophy, history, even psychology. When you read Shakespeare, or for that matter, poets like Browning or Keats, the depth of what the human mind is capable of is open to you. It also holds you in its thrall about all that is eternal in human nature. You appreciate culture, plurality, and different ways of thinking. Also, literature enables you to articulate and express yourself better. Language is a lifelong companion. I loved my college life. I have lasting friendships with my classmates from my literature degree. Why did I take law as a career? Reflecting back, I think it was an extremely bold, perhaps even foolhardy choice. It could have been disastrous considering that my father was in government service and none of my relatives were lawyers or had any connection with law. When I was in college, in the first year, the internal emergency ended and political rallies were held. I became aware of what was going on during the elections in 1977. In other words, I became politically aware. Soon afterwards, the new government set up commissions of inquiry to examine emergency excesses. I attended those public hearings. That was my first introduction to what legal proceedings were. By the end of the second year in English, in my honors course, I decided that I would not appear in the civil service examination, which was then a popular option, often called as a national pastime. Not that I would apply to management school and that I would complete my degree in law and start practicing. My parents, fortunately for me, were fully supportive, despite knowing that this was not a great option, and despite the fact that my father was to retire soon, and any prospects of my supporting the family with any income were in the distant future. Incidentally, I'm the eldest among all siblings in the family. Having chosen law, I never looked back. I relished in the debates in class, the interaction with other classmates, and the entire atmosphere in law college, given that all of us came from entirely different backgrounds. Many had graduated in science or commerce, and some of our classmates were clear that they just wanted an additional degree. Some were much older than most of us. Despite this, and despite a huge class strength, our class strength was something like 60 or 70. There was a spirit of bonhomie and friendliness throughout. When I was a first year student, in fact, sometime in the first semester in September 1979, I stepped into the Supreme Court having read that the great Nani Palkhiwala, one of the most eminent and eloquent lawyers of all times, would argue in an important case. It was a lifetime experience, utterly captivating. And within a few days of attending the hearing, the case is now a landmark judgment, Minerva Mills, I had decided that I wanted to be a lawyer and eventually practice in the Supreme Court. Before I went to the court, I did not know what the Constitution was. In the second day of hearing, I decided that I should know what the Constitution was. I bought a pocket edition and was trying to follow what the great Nani Palkhiwala said. After this, I did not give a second, I did not give a thought of the why or the how, what would I do when I joined practice, the impression was as lasting as that. My seniors in the profession, after I graduated, were very good lawyers. Both were first generation lawyers, incidentally, and both became senior counsel in the Supreme Court, and also later on went to become additional solicitors general of India under different administrations. From my first senior, I learned the value of precise drafting and thorough and painstaking research. I also learned civil law and procedure because he had a lot of original side work in the High Court of Delhi. From my second senior, I learned that the main task of a lawyer is to solve his client's problem and present simple and intelligible arguments. He taught me invaluable lessons through example of speed reading, in completing drafting, of on-the-feet thinking and out-of-the-box thinking, as well as the value of time. These lessons from both these seniors have remained with me throughout. Being in the bar, practicing as a lawyer, one gets to learn from one's seniors, as well as others, on what to do and what not to do, as I said earlier. From the example of the present Attorney General, who was at that time also a very distinguished lawyer, I learned that there is great merit in preserving notes on any line of research one conducts for future reference. I still have my notes, which I started 36 years ago. From the late Ashok Desai, I learned the habit of keeping a pocket book containing references to commonly used precedents. And precedents, as your law school will teach you, are references to previously decided cases, which can be pulled out from one's jacket and seen whenever needed in court. My pocket book and notes remain with me even now, till date. And sometimes I take my pocket book to the court, even as a judge of the Supreme Court. I was fortunate to receive kindnesses from many persons, apart from my two seniors. Encouragement and indulgence by judges, help from senior lawyers who would step in and praise any good effort, at times praised by opposite counsel, and above all, providing opportunities, not because I was someone's junior or known to him or her, but because the lawyer found merit in the younger man's capabilities, helped me reach where I am today. As I said, I learned what was and was helped by many seniors. I also others like Mr. Sorabji, who in his first stint as Attorney General included me in the panel of lawyers for one of the most important cases of the time, a review in the Bhopal gas leak disaster proceeding before the Supreme Court. And encouragement by several others similarly built my confidence and later practice. When I was asked whether I would be a judge by Justice Dalbir Bhandari, now a judge in the ICJ, I did not have to think twice. A few months later, I was formally asked by Justice Patel, the then Chief Justice of Delhi. This was 2004. When I took my seat in the High Court, I had no inkling and I did not dream that I would be where I am. But just before I did take my seat, two of my seniors, who were then Supreme Court judges, sent word to me, not seniors in the sense of being seniors in the profession, but who had observed me and who had known me. So when I went to meet them, both of them said the same thing, that we are very happy that a lawyer like you is becoming a judge, is agreed to become a judge. It entails sacrifice, but don't be under any illusion that you're the best for the job, because be assured that at least 10 people are out there who might be better. But having joined, do not forget that you use the opportunities that you get to the best possible extent. And remember always that being a judge in a court means that you have to listen to people and try to give them a solution. Because courts are the institutions of last resort. When all else fails and people don't get what they think is their due, they come to court. So start by listening to people and end the day by listening to people. Now, coming to the more conventional part of my speech, what would I recommend to you as students? I would again say something very unconventional. I would say go and see good movies which have some legal theme if you're interested in those. Or if you like read legal, I would say not just books on law, which would anyway be prescribed, but read any fiction that deals with law or some legal principles, or about great lawyers and great trials. This will generate interest and curiosity in the law. All of you come from different disciplines from at school, science, humanities, commerce, etc. So I would suggest that you do some general reading to widen your knowledge. Develop and cultivate an easy, conversational, and speech style in writing to try to be simple. Lawyers and judges can be impossible to understand because of their complicated language. You can and should make a difference and speak the language of the law in a simpler, direct, and effective manner. Try that. The second thing is develop a questioning mind and never stop being restless till your mind is satisfied with some answer given to you. If your teachers cannot give you satisfactory answers, seek them out from those who can give you sound answers, or read relentlessly till you get it. The important thing is to never stop questioning, said Albert Einstein. That is never more true than when applied to law. Accept nothing till you're convinced. Never be convinced because an older person or any man and woman tells you that this is so because it has been told to me and that you have to accept it because I'm telling you. Follow this and you will not stray from the path of the truth. Law and the study of law is a fascinating journey, especially litigation more so, because there is no dull day in your career. A legal career exposes you all truly to the most diverse kind of people with a variety of behavior. It involves you to educate yourself constantly in technology, in science, concepts relating to property, tax, family and matrimonial disputes, and so on. Equally, it will leave you wondering about the kind of people who frequent the courts and the legal system. The miserly, the generous, the shady and devious, the noble, the intelligent, the stupendously stupid, and equally cunning. And there will be stories and tales, legends from previous generations, canteen gossip, which will fascinate many, and exaggerations. You will also witness some humorous and interesting moments each boring day after the other that will keep the spark alive. What is this legal world of robed lawyers and stern judges? It is a mysterious kind of cult. Look at the language that we all speak, and the habits we cultivate with archaic language that takes an effort to understand. Outwardly, yes, all these. But once you get past these exteriors, the law is much, much more. It provides the bedrock, the basis of an orderly society. Behind every legal precept is a reason, a principle with a compelling logic, which is crying out for study. That is what is most rewarding to you, the study of the reason why some legal principle exists. And you will soon notice that often the logic does not appeal to you because it has no relevance today. This is an important phenomenon because it shows that law to be dynamic and forever changing. Logic that was sound formed on the basis of formed the basis for a previous generation's law, but that logic is not sound today, and you will change it or discard it. You will be taught in law school the value of judgments, which are precedents that every lawyer should know. Please do not be afraid. My advice to you here is first understand the reason or logic for a legal principle or even a provision. Then understand the main reason for the judgment. The rest will take care of itself. The most important thing for you is to understand and appreciate the concept of the rule of law and why a legal order exists. The rule of law simply means this, that for every situation, the law rules. Persons and positions do not rule because we're in a democracy. Instead, the law rules and rules equally. You will say this is all theory, and in practice, some people, because of their position or influence or money, are above the law. Let us not blame the law. Here we have to blame ourselves. Each time we bend the rule or help ourselves, a principle is broken and the rule of law suffers. Whether it is a simple thing like jumping a queue for an application, or jumping the traffic light, or evading taxes, or doing something that seems harmless, we injure the law. Because those in the queue, or those who are honest in payment of their taxes, or those who wait for the light to turn green, are made to suffer at the expense of the lawless people. It is like giving distinction to someone who cheats and denying good marks to someone who deserves it. Therefore, it is important to respect the law and the rule of law. My most important piece of advice to you: above all, be yourself, true to yourself, and never behave as though you're someone else. Shakespeare said it best in Hamlet. This is above all, to thine own self be true, and it must follow as the night, the day, thou canst not be false to any man. And do not ever forget the people who have made you what you are. Those proud parents who are sitting by your side, hopefully watching this, or who have been behind you. Your parents, teachers in school, and friends, both of your age, as well as others who have kept faith and company with you. Be ever grateful to them. More so your parents and teachers in later life, especially when you taste success. I promise you, the journey through the study and practice of law will be most rewarding, intellectually, materially, and morally. I'll thank the NLSIU for this great opportunity to address all of you. Wishing you all the best. Thank you.
Thank you, Justice Bhatt. That was a absolutely fascinating introduction to the world of law, to rogue lawyers and stern judges, and stupendous stupidity and large-hearted generosity. I think if there ever was a good introduction to and an enlivening orientation to the law, that was it. I hope we can introduce the students to this kind of color and texture and liveliness of the law in our classrooms. We have a number of questions, but I'm just going to take the liberty of starting out with one of my own. So you describe the law as almost as a sense as a lifelong journey of constantly questioning, of being restless, of never accepting anything on the basis of authority, and the laws keep changing. So if that's the case, in the 5 years in law school here, what do you think should be the students' top priority, aside from the academic curriculum? So you mentioned going, thinking about philosophy and history and going to watch movies and, creating your character beyond just the technical legal education. What would you say to students as an important message for them to carry and sort of a North Star for them to look at through the course of the 5 years?
I think there can't be any straight one kind of answer, because each one has to find his own groove, his own place. But broadly speaking, I would say that you should not confine yourself to readings prescribed in law school. You should look at other things. Look at the society around you. It's very, very important to know your society. I mean, I can say that now, looking back these 38 or 39 years, but I was not as conscious as I am today, obviously, when I was a law student. But I feel that the kind of opportunities you get to study the subjects that are offered make you more sensitive and socially aware today than it was when I was a student. And there are greater opportunities for you to immerse yourself in some of the, legal clinics, and also become aware, because don't get me wrong, any of you, but being in a law school, and that too a prestigious law school like you, means that there is some privilege. You've been able to get through CLAT. You've cracked that examination, and you also got good grades in school. So there is I wouldn't say all of you, but there is definitely a sense of coming from some good schools, from some kind of backgrounds. Again, it's not a it's a generalization. Please don't take it to heart. So it's important for people who come from these backgrounds to be aware of what our country really is. Because as a lawyer, and I'm desperately hoping that most of you will be lawyers in the courts and not sitting behind desks in corporate desks. If you are going to be lawyers in courts, it's very important to know what your society, who your clients are. They may be rich clients, they may be poor clients. And the value of this is that ultimately it teaches you compassion. You have to be, first and last, a compassionate, empathetic, and humane person. You can't equip yourself at one go. It comes after a lifetime of experience. But this is a good place to start. So I would say that apart from reading, you also have to socialize with people and try to reach out to everyone, and read more than what is prescribed, and certainly more than the law, and try to become aware of the environment around you, the social environment.
Right. So I think that's a very important point that I hope that we can emphasize in classrooms about the world of the law and the society outside of campus and outside of the classroom, which is perhaps a better teacher than any of us can ever be. So we have one question from Srishti, who's asking, which I think is a very honest question, that have you ever experienced self-doubt or while working towards something, or did you ever question your capacities or your work? And if so, how did you deal with it? How did you deal with that circumstance?
It would be, I would be vain to say that I've never experienced it. I think every human being experiences self-doubt, and constantly you are questioning yourself, sometimes your abilities to, and your abilities and what you're equipped with to deal certain complex issues or complex questions which might arise. These may not be very complicated questions of law, but it might be a very human factor, a human issue. So then as in most things, the important point is not to be weighed down with the point of self-doubt, but to try to resolve it with whatever you've been trained in, to confront it head on and try to get solutions within yourself. If you can't get those solutions, speak to others who might be able to help you. And don't rest till you get some semblance of a glimmer of light ahead of the tunnel. So it's important to not be weighed down by those self-doubts, because if you're weighed down, then you're always questioning yourself. And I would give this example from our scriptures of even the greatest man, the greatest yogi, Arjuna. He also he feels doubt, and that's why you have the Bhagavad Gita. So all of us face that. Sometimes we almost feel those existentialist, we have these existentialist crises about issues, about things which confront us. But that shows that we're alive and we're thinking. So therefore, it's important to face them and try to resolve them rather than back down.
There's one more question from Yogesh, which I'm going to slightly modify myself. So Yogesh is asking that there is, in a sense, there is such large amount of disagreement between everyone on basic issues of what's right, what's wrong, what justice is. And especially as everyone moves away from the home environment to a university environment where you're going to encounter people with different viewpoints from different parts of the country. How do you deal with people who disagree with you? How do you deal with disagreement on issues where you feel very strongly?
What you can decide, you decide. If you, if there is a principle you disagree with, and that's an established principle, as a judge, for me, it's very easy. I have to follow the principle. Now, if I question the soundness of that principle, I must have the courage to question it and do what is needed in the present setup. Otherwise, I have to follow the logic of that principle or precedent. But otherwise, how do I deal with disagreements generally? I would only say this. We live in a society, a democracy, where disagreements are bound to occur, should be there. That only, it's through dialogue, disagreements, is there any progress? The ability, we can't agree on everything all the time. Then it would be like a placid lake, which is very uneventful and very boring. Therefore, society has to have this constant dialogue. And sometimes these disagreements seem very fundamental and perhaps they may even sound violent. But the point is, we may have to agree to disagree, but let's not be disagreeable about it. We as a society have to learn that disagreement is as much part of our culture as agreement on certain things. And that disagreeing with each other should not be a disagreeable in a disagreeable manner. So that ability to respect the other person's thoughts, and if not completely agree with it or not agree with it at all, is something we must inculcate in our culture and in our beings.
So I think, especially given that a lot of our dialogue publicly today has become a bit divisive and high-pitched, I think that's Yogesh asked a very important question. I think your answer has a lot for us to think about. There's a question that I think many students will also have, which is that you are a first-generation lawyer, like you mentioned, and you, in a sense, jumped into the world of the law without any safety net, without any backing. What would you, and now today law school graduates are going out and doing all sorts of entrepreneurial enterprises, not just directly in relation to the law. So the element of risk and of going out there and creating something new is much more alive. What words of advice would you have? What would you say to someone who's looking to branch out on their own and do something which they don't have family support for?
You see, speaking for myself, it was not an easy choice, as I said. And I suppose the same applies to anyone who does not come from, whose background is not from the world of law, or for that matter, into any career she or he chooses. Supposing you complete your law and then want to branch out into becoming an entrepreneur. Well, you're not really equipped for it in the sense that you've not been trained, but then your heart says that you must do it. So it's a matter of the confidence that you have in your idea, the positive attitude that you carry with yourself. Well, it doesn't seem very great right now because you're all first-year students. But at the end of the day, after 5 years, you would have a degree, and that degree will teach you how to think, because somewhere down the line you would have been equipped, and also you would have grown. Now I assume all of you would be 18. By the end of this, you would be 22, 23. So at that age, you will have a different mindset. So hopefully this journey of 5 years should give you solutions as to what kind of thinking is possible at the end of the day. Otherwise, I can't really give a generalized assurance that, you will do well. All that I can say is whatever positivity you have, you cherish it. Do not become negative. Do not become prey to, self-doubt or be weighed down by it. And I know it's very difficult because we are living in very trying and troubled times where you're not able to meet people. You're not probably able to, you will not be attending classes in person, but at the same time, be firm in the belief and hopefully a lot of faith that this will also end sometime. All this will come to an end and things will be better. So with that, this is the assurance I can give you. The best thing is you have to have confidence in yourself, whatever idea you want to, put into practice.
I'm reminded of a saying that nothing is worth doing unless it has an enormous chance of failure put before you. So perhaps that's something, like you said, we all have to face, and hopefully we face it early on, like Justice Roberts says, rather than later on. So Gautam has a very interesting question. He's asking that, what's the one thing, looking back from your experience of 38, 39 years, what's the one thing that you think has changed in you or in the profession that you think is important? I think they've taken some of your advice on asking searching questions very early on.
One thing that has changed.
About you or about the profession?
About me, I can't say one. Yes, one thing, perhaps I've become more, my journey. It's difficult for me to assess myself like this without any forewarning. But yes, I believe that having traveled 39 years and at this age, whatever I have learned, I know that I don't have all the answers, and that I should always acknowledge, and that I will always be a student every day of my life, hoping to learn from everyone, the lawyers who appear in front of me, even the raw juniors who come with their propositions, and what I'm constantly trying to do is to be not biased. So these are the two things which I have learnt, and hopefully I will never give up, because it's too late in the day at 63 to give up these things. Well, without sounding very vain, the point is that one has to keep listening. You have to keep an open mind, the willingness to learn and adapt, and willingness to learn from anyone and everyone, and not just acknowledged names or big names. These are the few things which I think have helped me a lot as a professional and as a human being.
So there's one more question from Pravidhi, which I guess a very practical question, but perhaps one that most lawyers and judges face, which is that how do you engage and read a text that might not interest you much, that you find boring, but is still important? Which I guess is a bit of a practical question about how do you keep yourself engaged and excited, even if you don't necessarily find the particular area of law interesting?
As a professional, you must reach a point. If you're a true professional, and I include that, I mean, that term would include lawyers and judges, perhaps I would say even academics. There is nothing which should be boring. Everything that comes to a judge, or for that matter, a lawyer, has a human element. At the end of the day, it could be somebody's property, it could be somebody's life, it could be someone's marriage, it could be custody of a child, it could be some money involved in tax. Although in tax or commercial disputes, we don't see the human angle, but yet at the same time, it could be a matter of great moment to the parties concerned. So therefore, we have to consciously be aware, always constantly be aware that something is at stake. And that somebody's something should make us realize that we have to apply our mind to whatever is our brief. As a lawyer, to put forth your case, as a judge, to try and find a practical and easy, swift solution. So therefore, that is the best incentive for you to keep engaged, despite the subject matter being very boring or something which doesn't excite you. It's like let's say that, I mean, it's not a very good analogy, but each day you can't get your food. You don't get the best dishes that you love in your food all the time, don't you? So you have to have, but at the same time, you have to have your food. Because
I think
dishes that you might like might not be good for you. Might be unhealthy.
I've heard you say before that you have to get better or get bored. So maybe it's a question of keeping yourself engaged and excited and moving on to new areas. And in fact, I should mention, and this is in fact for me a particular point of inspiration, having also had the chance to work with Justice Bhatt, of the range of areas that he has covered, which I think is quite remarkable in both intellectually speaking, its breadth, but I guess also personally speaking, in the ability, like he says, to constantly keep engaging and taking up new areas of the law. And not just the law, but like he said, of fiction and of movies as well, which I think is perhaps something that we here at NLS think is very important as well, about a general curiosity to learn, independent of the subject, which I think Justice Bhatt has spoken very eloquently about. Justice Bhatt, we have time, I guess, for one more question, which has been asked a couple of times, which I think perhaps, especially the LLM students and many of them who are have some experience in the profession will be particularly interested in, which is that, have you ever had a situation where your own sense of right and wrong, your moral sense has been in conflict with what you had to decide as a judge or as a lawyer in terms of the kind of cases you took up, and how does one reconcile those two things?
That's a very, very interesting question. Yes, I have had those dilemmas. And the first time I encountered it was a very difficult case where a woman was accused of having abetted or helped in kidnapping a young child. And she was in jail. So one had to decide her bail application. It turned out that she had a very small child, not even a year old. And there was nobody to care for that child. Her relative who was caring for the child was wanting to move out of Delhi. So on the one hand, there was this child who had been abducted or kidnapped, and the person accused of it was asking for bail. So after seeing the records, I was satisfied that this was a case where I had to give bail. But I did it with such a heavy heart that probably that is the only time I actually had tears in my eyes, because I was I felt like weeping for the child who was kidnapped. So there are these dilemmas which do occur. But then even there, one has to make some sense of what is needed, because as between the two, there was a child, an infant who needed her mother. And therefore I thought that was important. And whatever it was, that's what I did at that moment. I didn't do it very happily, but I did it.
So I think that actually is that's an interesting note to end on, especially because of what you said right at the beginning about the law being inextricably linked with the people around us, with the society, not just in a very abstract way, but really as a story about the day-to-day lives of the people who come to us as lawyers and judges, and how we can use our legal skills to assist them and to help them, presenting the law with a human face, as it were. We have many, many more questions, but I'm afraid that I won't be able to take them. Although I think we will hopefully have Justice Bhatt on campus very soon, so that we can ask him all of our questions in person. But till then, Justice Bhatt, thank you very much for taking time out and coming with us and speaking so openly and so intimately about some of these issues. It's been fantastic for me to listen to all of these things, and I'm quite sure it was the same for my faculty colleagues and also for the students. So I think I speak for everyone in thanking you for taking time out and for coming to speak with us.
Thank you. Thank you. And all the best to you students. All the best to you in the next 5 years or the next 2 years for the LLM students, and have a great career ahead.
Thank you.
Much for joining us for the first commencement address, and we look forward to seeing all of you in the orientation sessions for the rest of the week and also for the commencement address. We'll try and add as many of you as possible to the panelist list so that you can switch on your videos through the 5 commencement addresses, so that you have a chance to interact with the speakers in a more lively way. I hope this address was interesting and was thought-provoking and was gave you an insight into what the law can look like. And hopefully the remainder of the orientation week will also give you a lot of food for thought. Thank you very much, and we'll see all of you tomorrow.